Well, here we are. Welcome to episode 3 of Base Camp. Base Camp. All right. Okay. Beautiful. Well, remember that we said that everything has a starting point, even you. And some of you have started on purpose, and some of you were a wonderful, blessed surprise. We had a starting point, and so did our faith. We were handed concepts, given ideas, stories when we were children, and they became our framework for faith. And then as we grew up, we really didn't work so hard at spiritual maturity, and so we just kind of hoped that it would happen on its own. Well, it didn't. And we started to feel like there was a space between our faith framework and our lived experiences. How do these things line up, and how are they divergent? And so we had questions. We became unsure, and faith kind of faded backwards, while the rest of our lives went forwards. And so together we are building. If you've missed an episode, please go back and give it a listen on the podcast, through YouTube. Go to the website, into1.ca. These pieces stack together. And by the end, it's a puzzle that we're putting together, but it will be incomplete if you miss some of the pieces. So please stay connected with us. We have said that faith has a starting point, but did you ever think of this? The story of faith has a starting point. Every faith tradition has a story behind it. They've all got a history, and those stories are fascinating. I say that because the truth is that most of us, I said they're fascinating, right? But most of us were really not interested in the history at all. I'm just a little nerdier than you are when it comes to faith and God and all of that. Our questions tend to be not so much, how did it begin, or Graham, tell me who was the founder of my faith. What we care about is that it's Sunday, right? And I've been talking to God. I've been asking God since like last Tuesday. And I'm saying, now, where's my God? Where's my God when I need him? I got that test tomorrow. Where's my super spirit brain when I need it? What can God do for me now? I'm not really concerned about the history. I'm concerned about the present and my future. And that's part of the reason that some of you have drifted away. You don't know the history of your faith. So today, we're going to go back in time, and I want to tie something that we have each struggled with in our current faith experience. I want to tie that to something that happened a long time ago. Did you know that the 3 largest faith traditions claim the same starting point? Did you know that? Islam, Judaism, Christianity all have the same faith starting point. All 3 believe that there is a single God who created the heavens and the earth. And he goes by different names. All 3 believe that the first man on earth was named Adam, which just so happens to also mean man. The prophet Muhammad taught that Adam was actually the first Muslim and also the first prophet. In Judaism, Adam is the first person. Christians also take the story of Adam and Eve seriously. But the reason that Christians take it seriously is not just because it's in the book of Genesis. Remember, this is not just about the Bible says. The reason Christians take it seriously is because Jesus mentions and Jesus teaches about Adam and Eve. We believe Jesus first. All 3 faith traditions also believe that somehow humanity messed up God's incredible, beautiful, perfect creation. God created this perfect world, and then human beings came in and started making selfish choices and messed the whole thing up. And now, regardless of what you believe about Adam and Eve, that's not our key place for today. After last episode, we can all agree that human beings tend to mess stuff up. We are not mistakers, we are sinners. It's bigger and it's more ongoing than just a mistake or two. All three faith traditions also believe that God focused attention and interaction around a single man. Not the only man, but there was a time when he focused on a single man, through whom God began to correct the ills of this world. God began to correct what humanity had messed up. And his name is Abraham. Abraham is where the three major religions all come together. Abraham is also where the three major religions separate. At Abraham, Islam goes in one direction and Judaism goes in another direction. And then a couple of hundred years later, Christians go in a new direction from Judaism. But Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all look back to Abraham as father, our founder. And that God began to intersect with humanity in a strategic partnership to fix this problem of sin, disobedience, and corruption and selfishness in the world. Now, I can probably guess again that you're saying, all of this is hugely interesting, Graham, please go on and on. But the reason that we're going to talk about this is because there is a conversation recorded in the book of Genesis between God and Abraham. And regardless right now of what you believe about the Bible, regardless of where you are in your faith or your lack of faith, this conversation touches on a tension that you have felt and that you have wrestled with to one degree or another. Perhaps you're even wrestling with it today based on your childhood faith tradition. It's based on a question that we have all asked at some point. Is there a God? If there is a God, well, how are we doing? Where do I stand with God? Does God hear my prayers? Does God care? Can I have peace? Can I ever know? Will I ever have a security about my future? And this little conversation has a little statement in it that's both perplexing and powerful. And I want to leave you to wrestle with this, because you need to work here too. It's not just about me. No one can make you believe. No one can build your faith. But you do need to engage with some questions. You need to actually work towards answering them yourselves. It was the lack of answering these questions earlier that allowed you to have an immature faith now. An immature faith that cannot stand up to the trials of your mature life. And so you go, I don't know about this church stuff. So there is an Abraham and you side to this story. And I want to tell you a story to help you see the dilemma that we're in, the dilemma that God had, and why Abraham was a guy that God paid any attention to at all. The story we'll call the Sea of Glass. A certain child was in the kitchen in bare feet. This child was struggling, climbing on the counter, trying to get something out of a cabinet just a little bit higher. And this endeavor went on for a moment or two in my peripheral vision. And then there shortly followed a prolonged series of crashes. And when I got there, I saw my son standing in the middle of a sea of broken glass in bare feet, looking afraid, looking fearful, looking apologetic, looking sad, looking lost and alone. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. At which point I, of course, raised my finger and pointed and said, I can't believe what you have done. You can just stand there because this serves you right. You should have been more careful. You know the rules. I've gone over them many times about not climbing on the counters, not reaching up too high. And so I walked away, back to where I was doing what I was doing before. And as I walked away, I just said over my shoulder, just stand there and bleed. Now, some of you, or maybe someone you know, think that is what God is like. Some of you think that God stares at you in your own sea of glass, a mess of your own making, all the damages and all the consequences of your decisions. Look what you've done. I'll be over here as you think about what you've done And as you try to figure out what you're going to do with all this, call me when you get this cleaned up, and I'll come back and inspect it and inspect you then. Yet for everyone who kind of thinks that God is like that, you don't for a moment believe that I would leave my son alone standing in a sea of broken glass. Which means that you believe that I have more compassion than God. Which makes me more compassionate than God. Which makes me more godly than God, which is not true. Which means that perhaps there is something about God that you do not know. So I did what any good father would do. I said, don't move. Don't move. Just stand still. Then I had a decision to make. Here is a huge mess. My son is trapped in the middle. Should I rescue him? So I did what you do when you have a mess that you don't even know how to begin to clean up with. I kind of looked at it. I didn't have a lot of time, and so I took my foot and I slid that first piece of glass out of the way, and then I moved forward a little bit, and I slid a little bit more glass out of the way, and then I moved forward, and I moved a little bit more glass out of the way until I got all the way to him. And I picked him up in my arms, and I lifted him out of the sea of glass, and I hugged him, and I carried him to the clear area of the floor. If this had been paint, and you're looking at that floor, you're starting to think, well, maybe just sell the house. Too big to clean up. In a similar way, mankind had so polluted the world. We think about injustice. You hear about this on the news all the time. We think about injustice in our world, but we cannot even begin to imagine the injustices in the ancient world. They're just everyday events, right? There's no law, so nobody's breaking it. No civil society. It's all survival of the fittest. Might makes right. Wealth equals human value. Slavery, not even a second thought. Kidnapping, commonplace. If you wanted someone or some things, you just took them. What are you going to do? There were no city-states. There were no nation-states like we think of them right now. And in a very chaotic, out-of-control society, it's just unimaginable in its regular daily offenses. And into that world, God stared and saw that sin had fully taken hold. If he was a God who cared, if he was a God who was compassionate, he had a decision to make. Do I wade into this mess and try to find a starting point for cleaning up a mess that someone else has created? Or do I just throw up the closed for business sign, the out of order sign for the whole earth? Maybe I just go somewhere else and do something else. And all of those three major faith traditions believe that God decided to wade into the mess of humanity. And he waded in by choosing a single man, Abraham. And he said, I'm going to start there. So around 1876 BC, God interrupted humanity, and he chose Abraham as his starting point for fixing the mess that humanity had made of the planet. And it's interesting because Abraham is such an ordinary guy. He wasn't super righteous. He had some big issues, and some of those stories are recorded too. It's not just the good stuff that got recorded, but also that real human stuff. But God had decided to start somewhere. And so he picked an imperfect Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I'll show you. So please leave. Abandon your entire circle of influence, everyone you know, everything you know. And I realize that you've got no kids, and by this time your wife is too old to probably have kids. I want to isolate you, Abraham, because I'm starting over. And Abraham, I'm doing something new. I'm starting something that is ultimately going to impact the world, the whole world. And I've chosen you. Don't ask me why. I had to start somewhere. So God gives 3 promises to Abraham. Three interesting promises. And so as we keep going, you need to understand that I'm not right now asking you to believe that any of this is true. All right? I'm just asking you to listen. Because it certainly is curious, even if you don't think it's true. Promise number 1, Genesis 12:2. I will make you into a great nation. And that came true. You know. The nation of Israel says, we're that great nation. And the Arab nations say, no, we're that great nation. And there's an argument over which great nation is meant, but there is no argument that many great nations came from the man Abraham. This promise by God to Abraham made almost 4,000 years ago absolutely came true. God was about to address a big problem, sin, disobedience, and corruption in the world. He was about to begin to drain the swamp on earth, and yet he started with a man, and he basically said, I'm going to make a nation out of you. I'm going to make you into a nation. First, I'll make you into a family. Then I'll make you into a nation. To which, Abraham could have raised his hand and said, but God, that seems like that's going to take an awfully long time. So God has a problem on his hands, and he picks a man, and he says, one day, someday, you are going to be a nation. I'm going to build a nation, and through partnership with that nation, I'm going to do a significant work in the world. Promise number 2, also Genesis 12:2. And I will bless you. I will make your name great. So, it's survey time. If you have ever heard the name Abraham, if you've ever heard any part of that Father Abraham story before today, raise your hand. Ever heard about Abraham before today? Look around, right? That's pretty much everyone. That's pretty amazing, right? Have you ever heard about this guy? Look at this guy's name. Chedorlaomer. Chedorlaomer was a king, big king, famous king, powerful king. He was a powerful king of Edom. How many of you have ever heard of Edom? Right? Can you find Edom on the map? No, the kingdom doesn't even exist anymore. In Abraham's day, everyone that Abraham knew would know who Chedorlaomer was. So how is it that you have never heard of him? So God says to a nobody, I'm going to make your name great. And here we are, 4,000 years later, halfway around the world, in a different language, in a different culture, in countries that hadn't been discovered yet, and basically everyone knows something about this guy, Abraham. Curious, isn't it? Another promise fulfilled by God. Promise number 3, Genesis 12:3. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Super cool. Remember, we have mentioned this before. We have been blessed to be a blessing to all nations. Peoples, not people. People groups. Somehow, all people groups are going to be influenced. Or more literally, all people groups are going to be better off because of you, Abraham. And the Muslim nations would say, totally, that's us. All the Muslims and all those Muslim nations are better off because of Abraham. And all the Jewish people who have ever lived say, yeah, actually, look at all the people that the Jews have made better. All blessed because of Father Abraham. And the Christians come in a little bit later and they go, no, hold on a second, just think of all the things that the Christians have done, right? We didn't just stay with our own countries, we went out, hospitals, schools, orphanages, humanitarian aid. Just look at all the people who are better because of the long-reaching blessing of Abraham. To which God might just say, well, that was my point. All the peoples of the earth would be blessed through you. Now, aren't those interesting, ancient coincidences? There's no one who even comes close to touching our world like Abraham does. And you can't help but notice that all three major faith traditions say, yeah, he's ours, right? That's the history part. Now for the personal part. Abraham's getting older, and God says he's going to make him a nation. The whole world is going to be blessed through you. But Abraham's an old man, and he has no children. And he realizes that if he dies, that his inheritance, everything that he's put together, everything he owns, doesn't go to a relative. It goes to Eleazar, another guy you've never heard of. Eleazar was the chief servant, and everything was going to go to him. And Abraham's thinking, how can these promises that God gave me come true? How is this going to work? And one night he's praying, he's struggling, he's wondering how all this can happen. God, you said it. Genesis chapter 15, verse 4. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. Don't worry, Abraham. I know the problems. I've got solutions. Verse 5, he took him outside and said, look up at the sky, count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham, I want you to trust me. And I know that will be hard. From where you're sitting right now, I know that's going to be hard. But trust me. Trust me. I know that you have 0 children at this moment, and your wife is barren. But trust me. You will become a great nation. And then the writer of Genesis makes a statement that's so powerful, so personal. Maybe you've heard this before, maybe not. But it's easy, really easy to just read right over and to just keep right on going, because we've been taught you got to do my Bible reading, I got to get my Bible reading finished, I got to read from here to there. And there are some profound implications here. And as far as we can tell, this is the very first time in history that God states the nature of the relationship between God and humanity. How can someone as small and flawed and finite as me have a relationship with Almighty Creator God? You know, is that even possible? And here God sets the terms for relationship with Him. You have asked this question in your own way. Can I know? Can anyone really know where they stand with the invisible, silent God? This statement is where the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews go in 3 different directions. This is a statement that none of the 3 major faiths were ever able to embrace fully without adding to. And it's unbelievable. And it's also unbelievably simple. Sounds too good to be true. If this was just coming from me, you should totally question it deeply. This happened hundreds of years before Moses and the 10 Commandments. It was hundreds of years before the law. 2,600 years before Islam. 2,000 years before Jesus. God makes promises to Abraham. And in Genesis 15:6, Abram believed the Lord, and He credited it to him as righteousness. I have no children, and I'm going to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the heavens. Okay, I'll trust you. And in that super teeny tiny moment, that single solitary expression, God credited to Abraham a righteous standing before God. And in a single moment, in a single expression of faith, God said to Abraham, I'm giving you the gift of a right standing with me, and you did nothing to earn it. All that junk in Egypt, lying about your wife, embarrassing, not holding that against you. Trusting God resulted in a right standing with God. This is the first implication that a human being can have a right standing with God. How did it happen? Faith. Trust. And then we practiced messing it up for years. I'm not trying to be critical here. I'm just trying to load us all on this road trip together. And here's what happened. Years would go by, And the Jews would come along, and they would miss this. No, 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 no. No. You have a right standing before God. How you do that? It's by being Jewish. We ain't God's chosen people for nothing, baby. And by the time that Jesus showed up a couple of thousand years later, the Jews told Jesus, we don't need you. We are Abraham's sons and daughters, and that's enough, because we're born in. Now, you Gentiles, if you want to be right with God, all you have to do is become Jewish. And we can help to graft you into this vine, and you can also be Abraham's sons and daughters. It's all about who you are related to. Birth. Now, more time would pass, like about 620-something AD, Muslims. More than 600 years after Jesus, the prophet Muhammad would come along and he goes, no, the way that you have a right standing with God is that you must believe in the one true God. And you must believe in his prophet. And you must do works and acts of righteousness. Then, at the end of your life, your good works are going to be collected, they're going to be added up, and they're going to be measured against your bad. And then Allah will determine if you have a righteous standing. God wills it. You won't know until the very end. It's what you believe and it's what you do that counts. Behavior. Then about 30 minutes after Jesus left the earth, the Christians started arguing about this. And one group said, step 1, become Jewish. Step 2, keep the whole law of Moses. And another group says, there's no way that they can keep the whole law of Moses. They don't even know the law of Moses. They don't even know Moses. And somebody said, well, you have to believe, but believing is really difficult. And right on up through the Reformation, the church has been split over this issue. How do you have a right standing with God? How do you know when God says that you are approved? How do you know when God says, I love you, we're good? How do you know when you have done enough, when you've believed enough? How do you know? Can you know? Is it birth? Is it behavior? Is it belief? Is it a combo? 400 years before any of those religions existed, before there was anyone who considered themselves Jewish or Muslim or Christian, God revealed to Abraham the secret. And it's almost incomprehensible to believe that the Most High God would make this standard, this incredibly important standard, so simple. That the Most High God would put the bottom rung of the ladder so low. That the Most High God, who saw each of us in the middle of our own sea of glass, the one that we made, the mess that we created, disobedience and complicated up our own lives and others. Regardless of what we believe theologically, regardless of what we believe about sin, we have all been in a place where we have created our own mess. And we wondered, dare we call on God to help us? That very same God, the King, informed us that the way that you enter into a relationship with me, where I call you righteous and approved, it's not who you're related to. It's not through your behavior. It's simple. Trust. Will you trust me? Will you do what Abraham did? Will you say, it's hard to believe. Hard. It's almost impossible to believe. But I'm going to trust that what you say is true. And that you'll do what you've promised to do. And almost everyone has missed it. And God made it so simple. What if the starting point for a relationship with God is trust? What if what we saw with Abraham and God at the start, where God decided to wade into that sea of glass, he looked at the big mess all over the world and he decided, I've got to start somewhere. I'll start with one unrighteous man, and I'm going to connect with him in a personal way. And all I require is that he say, God, I trust you. What if that's it? What if that really can be our entry point into relationship with God? The starting place. And this is hard. It's hard because of the way that you have been raised. It's hard because of what you have heard from people like me. It's hard because of what you have heard in temple and in mosque and in synagogue and in church. It's hard because of what you've read. It's hard because of what's been laid on you. There is no other place in the world where you can be unconditionally loved and accepted simply based on trust. It didn't happen at school, did it? Didn't happen on the sports field. It didn't happen at work. For many of us, sadly, for most of us, I'm so sad to say, it didn't even happen in church. And yet, when we go back, pre-Christian, pre-Jewish, pre-Islam, and find the one man that they all want to take credit for, God said to Abraham, I declare you righteous because you trusted in me. Simple trust. Now, here's a question to chat with someone about. Which of the following best reflects your view? Why? God accepts me based upon my birth, my behavior, my belief, or some combination of the above. Not what do you say is the right answer, but what do you actually believe? As in, what is actually guiding the way that you live? Is it faith? Is it faith and? What did you grow up with? I want you to hold that thought till next episode. Until then, though, remember that you have been blessed to be a blessing to all nations. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the story that you have written throughout time. For Abraham to stand there and say, I don't have a son, I'm already old, my wife is barren, that is very hard to believe. Not only that I'll have a son, not only that I'll have a family, but somehow from me, I will be a great nation, that all people on earth will be blessed through me. That is hard to believe. And it's not just a statement that Abraham made, it was a statement with conviction behind it. Okay, I will trust you. I believe that you will do what you have said. That's how it started. So God, for us, the position that we're in, there's so much about this whole God relationship church thing. What do we do with the Bible? There's things that are in this that are hard to believe. We're not naive about it. We know that these things are hard to believe. And yet we start simply by saying, I trust you. If that's what you said, then that's what you will do. I'll trust you. And I'm going to live in such a way that displays that I continue to trust you. That's the path that we're walking on right now. And God, I pray that you would help us in this process, that we would engage with questions that are difficult, that maybe we don't want to wrestle with. It's certainly easier to not wrestle with them. But bring them back to our minds. I pray that we might see you more clearly. So guide us forward, Jesus. We need your help. Send your Spirit to guide us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.